Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits. Joining me today is Alejandro Mayoral to talk about starting nonprofits and the differences between the North and the South. Alejandro, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, Alex. So excited to be here.
So, my favorite first question to start is what is your superhero origin story? That is to say, how did you get started working with nonprofits?
Oh my God, Alex, it's a long story, but I'll try to summarize it for your audience. But it started in university. I was a computer science student. Very engaged into video games and all these geeky stuff and digital technologies. And at the time, Facebook was just coming out, so everyone was talking about the potential of social media. And what happened is I did my undergrad in Mexico City. And as part of our requirements to finish the program, we needed to do some service learning in some underserved communities. So I started doing my work in the countryside of Mexico, in the eastern part, in a state called Veracruz. And I started engaging with a lot of indigenous communities and with a lot of indigenous youth. And it was so interesting because at the time, the university already had some programs, being delivered in those communities. But I started seeing the flaws of a lot of the approaches. And it was not because I was an expert. I was just a student, right? I mean, computer science. But what it was very evident was that the disengagement and some of obvious lack of input from community members. So from there, a group of people and myself, we started discussing how we can improve the delivery of the projects in these communities. And it was so interesting when we started like talking, having like common conversations with a lot of community members about the potential of doing long-term projects with them. And it was very interesting to hear from the communities that they were so invested in actually co-creating with us some of these community projects. And that's how we started. It was very grassroots. We didn't have any idea about fundraising, anything about non-for-profits. And we just started, co-creating with communities. And one special part of all this journey is when, of course, we started asking ourselves now how we're going to pay for this, how we're going to start, building up all these projects. Is when we went back to the whiteboard and we were like, okay, how we're going to start raising money. And one of my friends just very indirectly told me, oh, why you don't incorporate a non-for-profit? And I replied back immediately, what is a non-for-profit? What is this? I don't know what is this. And they suddenly told me, Alejandro, well, a non-for-profit, is an entity, it's a company that is for social purpose. That's how my friend defined it. And I said, okay, that sounds interesting. And we just started raising money to incorporate a non-for-profit. We sold a lot of donuts, Krispy Kreme donuts. I never gonna forget, to actually raise the money for incorporate a non-for-profit, and that's how we started. I was 19 years old, and it started the entire journey of creating the non-for-profit.
I think it's a fascinating tale of the indigenous people of Mexico. I'm more familiar with the Mayans and the Aztecs. What does, because I'm sure some of our viewers would love some, or listeners rather, would love a bit more context. When we talk about indigenous people in Mexico, who are we talking about? What are their needs? High level, we'll get to some details a bit later, but like just give us a picture of what indigenous people look like and what their life is like and their communities are like in Mexico today.
Oh yes, of course. And what I want to highlight for your audience is that actually the differences among indigenous communities here in the US and Canada with indigenous communities in Mexico, the differences relied on the colonizers, on like the colonial powers. But from the roots, actually, there are a lot of commonalities in the indigenous worldviews and in a lot of the teachings. So you will see a lot of commonalities between Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, Cree, Blackfoot, and the Mayans and the Aztecs. That are actually the real name is the Mexica people. Mexica is actually the name of Mexico. Mexico, and like now in English is pronounced Mexico. But Mexico is a Nahuatl world. Nahuatl is the indigenous language that is spoken by the Mexica people, and Mexico means the belly button of the moon. The belly button of the moon because Mexico has the shape of a half moon, and Mexico City, that it was the center of the Mexica Empire, was in the belly button in the center. So that's why it's called Mexico. So a little bit of the landscape is in Mexico, there are around 15 million indigenous people that are across all the states in Mexico. And we are talking about 85 different indigenous language groups that in total are 370 different indigenous languages. And especially in the southern part of the country, where are the states of Oaxaca, Chiapas, where are the Zapatistas, Veracruz, and Yucatan are the main states with the most indigenous populations. Um, there are a lot of commonalities in the challenges that indigenous communities in Mexico are facing as First Nations here in Canada around the isolation and the lack of educational and work opportunities. So one of the main challenges that they are facing is the migration outside of communities. So a lot of people are leaving their communities because, of course, they are seeking for economic opportunities elsewhere in the country. Um, and of course, this is leaving the communities with several problems. There is a lot of substance abuse within the communities. And of course, right now, one of the biggest challenges is with the displacement of many communities due to a lot of criminal activity on the countryside of Mexico. This is creating challenges to continue keeping the culture alive. However, in the opportunity side, what you see is, of course, the resiliency that a lot of indigenous communities are having, and a lot of digital tech actually tools are supporting how indigenous peoples are revitalizing culture among different landscapes in Mexico, and how actually they are maintaining the languages. So it's very fascinating what is happening, and something very important also. And this is gonna be, I can talk for hours about this topic. Something very important to highlight for your audience is in the context of Mexico, and I would say in the rest of Latin America as well. When the colonization process happened historically, being mixed with indigenous blood was like the mix between indigenous and the Spaniards in this case made people more close to whiteness. So mixed identity was considered white or like non-indigenous. While in the context of Canada, for example, the Métis that was this the result of the connections between the French and the Cree people, actually that entitle a lot of people to, and people get closer to indigeneity. So what you can see in this context is that if, for example, if the mestizo that are the outcome of the mix between indigenous and white, we consider this indigenous under the Canadian context. We can say that 85% of the population in Mexico is indigenous. So this is a little bit of why across a lot of the Mexican expressions you can see in several indigenous identities encrusted in all type of cultural expressions.
That is fascinating. Thank you so much for that picture because, yeah, in my ignorance, I definitely didn't know all of that or even half of that. But it did sound, as you were going through the list of some of the challenges and the opportunities, I did see some parallels just based on my own experience and what I've seen here in Canada that mirror the ones that are in Mexico in terms of opportunities and challenges and isolation and stuff like that. And that's obviously a big issue, and it's hard to try to solve that. And I don't think we're trying to solve that here, but at least give them this sense of you have opportunities. There are ways if you do want to find career paths and whatnot that there is training, education available to them And I'm really actually happy to hear about the computer stuff because, intuitively you would say, well, maybe they don't have access to the internet as fluently as we would here. And yet you seem to say that they are actually technologically inclined, or that the impression that I got, like, are they leaning toward, like, are they absorbing technology really, really well, or are they more keeping an arm's length from it overall?
I think, and this is very important, and I could share that this is across First Nations here in Canada and also with Indigenous communities in Mexico. We need to break the idea that Indigenous communities are still living as we picture them 200 years ago, 300 years ago.
Mm.
A lot of Indigenous communities are like any other communities that are around us. So that means that they are embracing a lot of the technological advancements that we have in the cities that we have around us. So something that I want to highlight is that Indigenous youth are also facing the same challenges that non-Indigenous youth are facing with Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the harassment, the discrimination, the being stuck in like scrolling for hours. Like the challenges are common because also they are using this type of technology. What is really interesting, and I want to highlight that, is how in a lot of Indigenous communities they are using technology in order to embrace their cultures. So I have a lot of examples how now, for example, digital art has become a big way of expression in a lot of communities. Because being a small community, sometimes the outlets to showcase your art are very limited. So when you find, for example, with digital art that you can showcase maybe your with Facebook, with Instagram, and share that with the world, that creates certain opportunities for someone that is isolated. Also is access to a lot of information and access to different services. And sometimes I'm not talking about the app that you use for your grocery store or maybe your banking application. I'm talking about, for example, here in Canada, you see a lot of band councils posting about what is happening in the community in Facebook groups. That is more effective than actually printing a poster and putting it into the band office, because now people are always connected and this is a way for them to be aware of what is going on. So these are just some examples of how communities are using technology in order to embrace what is happening in their communities.
Again, thank you so much. I mean, this is actually, I'm realizing as we're talking, as you're talking mostly, that there's a lot of ignorance on my side to knowing, just what life looks like, because of this, there's a separation, in certain areas, and we don't have access to, and it's not as fluid. The communities are not as fluid and in exchanging of ideas and thoughts, at least from my experience. Again, I'm one of a kind, but I definitely believe that there needs to be more education on both sides to say, look, we're living here together, and let's work together to become better together. And I look to, for example, New Zealand as an example. When
Mhm.
I spent some time there, I was really impressed by how I forget what word we could use, but how the First Nations integrated with the Europeans and the other second wave, let's call them, of people, to the point where I'm sure there's some tension everywhere, but at the surface level, everything looked like, or things looked like they were cohesive, that people embraced the origins of their cultures, that some of the dances they have when they do rugby tournaments and stuff like that, and just spending time in the food and the people and the art and the tattoos and all that stuff. It seems to be much more integrated in New Zealand than it does here, and it sounds like in Mexico as well. Here, meaning Canada. I would love to see that happen at some point in our communities, because I think there's so much to gain from each other. And just to add to that, I don't know how many years ago, it's been quite a few, maybe more than 10 now. I actually went to an actual powwow, helping out and organizing that event, and it was such an amazing moment. And I wish I was able to spend more time there to learn more, because it's absolutely fascinating. So these kinds of conversations and sharing of information, I think, can be very helpful to understand. Let's break down some of these walls of the stigma. And we all have the same challenges, like you said, with TikTok and technology and Facebook and whatnot. So the more we talk about it, the better I think we will both be.
And yeah, and actually, touch in one important aspect of the challenges of working in the non-for-profit sector with indigenous communities, and it's the diversity of communities.
Mm.
The Maori in Aotearoa, New Zealand, for example. New Zealand now recognizes that it is Maori land. Aotearoa is the official name of New Zealand. Uh, for example, the one particular thing of this specific territory is that the Maori is just one group that is like basically the only group in these specific islands in the Pacific. One of the complexities in the Canadian context, and I would say also of the Mexican context, is the diversity of communities. So even that we call them all of them under the umbrella of Indigenous, there are many different First Nations. There are many different Métis communities. There are many Inuit communities, and there are many, indigenous settlements across the Americas. So, in order to get to consent, is very difficult, and this is one of the challenges when you are trying to work with very diverse group of people. In the 70s and 80s, at the UN level, a lot of indigenous communities, they decided to start calling themselves indigenous because it was a way to create that international recognition. So it was a way to get political power at the international arena. However, when you go to the grassroots, you go to the local level, you can see the differences. And even that there are commonalities among communities, there are also many, many, many differences. And of course, it depends on the geography, it depends on the history, it depends or even like where they are located nowadays. So all these factors in creates, different types of approaches. So even for example, in our case that we are an indigenous national organization, we need to acknowledge that every single community is going to have different needs. And the priorities for one community might not be the priorities for another community. So how you can start embracing the diversity, but at the same time, you can move forward on an agenda. So this is a little bit of the challenges about it. And I think also this is a reminder to the audience that a part of what a lot of First Nations and Métis communities across Canada and Inuit communities as well, they are asking for is, I think there has been a lot of already a lot of efforts to actually put that information out. Now is also part of our responsibility as people outside of the First Nations, outside of the Métis communities, to learn about it, to engage with the communities, to be part of this reconciliation process in an active way. It's not the responsibility of the communities to be sharing this information, but what we are doing in order to learn more about it, how to become allies instead of just continue extracting information from the communities. So this involves, of course, time commitment. It involves effort that we need to invest in order to do all this work.
Let's get back then to your nonprofit. So you
Yeah.
started it. Remind me again, then the goal of the nonprofit, and is it mostly focused in Canada, in Mexico? Is it more of a global perspective? Let's just talk a bit about how you're trying to help.
Oh yeah, yeah, of course. The non-for-profit is called the Indigenous Friends Association. This is an indigenous tech non-for-profit, which mission is to how to bridge the gaps between indigenous peoples and digital technologies. And how we're doing this is through mentorship. So we are focusing in how through a framework of mentorship, indigenous members can get into the tech sector, not just to become part of an industry that is already very proficient and profitable around the world, but it's also about how to create more ethical digital tech for all, not just for indigenous peoples. I think and our like vision in the long term is how these leaders, indigenous leaders in the tech sector, can bring back the ethical perspective about community, about the environment when we are talking about the tech industry. And right now, our main focus is in Canada. We are our programs are focusing in First Nation, Métis Nations, and Inuit communities across the country. Especially after the pandemic, it was evident the need to have a national call. We have a lot of participants in Ontario, British Columbia, and Alberta that are Indigenous members on reserve and off reserve that are seeking to start pursuing an Indigenous tech career. And we are having not just the training on the side of the mentees or the participants, but also we're having conversations with the companies. What are the things that need to be changed within the system in order to welcome Indigenous workers or Indigenous tech workers? Because what we realize is that the first step is to be at the door and knock the door, but when they get in, how they change, how the system is welcoming these identities. And what we realize is that a lot of companies and organizations were not ready to welcome Indigenous talent. And the consequences were that they were not retained. That after 2, 3 weeks, or even a month, people were quitting these organizations. They were quitting the companies. So what are the systemic changes that we require in order to welcome Indigenous peoples? And it has been a very interesting conversation. And I can tell you that a lot of companies are doing their work and are investing resources and changing their policies in order to welcome Indigenous talent.
That's actually a topic I'm really curious to know more about. The
Yeah,
hiring process from the company side and from the training and
yeah.
preparation side from the Indigenous side. So how do we better prepare Indigenous people to be welcomed and accepted and just have they call it a plug and play type of situation where they're able to smoothly jump into a corporate world? And how do we let the corporate world say, look, here is the advantages, or here are the advantages of using this kind of talent because it gives us access to so much more from a perspective or holistic sense. Like, what would be, how
Mhm.
would you see maybe a couple of tips on both sides, how we could help each other?
Oh, yes. Yes, let me start on the more evident that is in the non-for-profit and how we can support Indigenous talent. One specific part that I always want to highlight is that there are tons of educational programs already in the country about getting tech skills. However, what they are failing in order to prepare Indigenous students or Indigenous participants is that they don't consider a lot of the worldviews of a lot of Indigenous members. And what do I mean with that? That is not just about the delivery of the content. It's not just about the technical perspective. It's about the soft skills and the creation of community around. In order for Indigenous talent to succeed, they need to feel that they belong. And in order to create that sense of belonging, is how you can create a community that can support them in order to succeed throughout, the career pathway. So what we have done is, of course, we start with the delivery of the technical content. So basically preparing them in UX, UI, in web development, in JavaScript, CSS, HTML, and digital marketing, but also as well in soft skills like leadership, how to perform an interview, how to time management, about self confidence, how to portray yourself. What we realized is a lot of the Indigenous members, when they were creating their CV, a lot of the things that they were doing for community and a lot of things that they were doing for even companies or organizations, they were not put into the CVs because they wanted to be humble about it. And it was like trying to frame it is okay, now you are gonna try to pursue a digital career. It's so important that you can highlight everything that you have done in the past and put it in a writing piece. So this is just an example of that mentorship aspect that we are providing to the mentees. And of course, providing them with access to elders and knowledge keepers in the case that they want to get more into the cultural side, or even they require more spiritual or emotional support. That is something that we encourage a lot of our students.
And before you jump in there, hang on, about mentorship. I'm curious to know before they become a mentee and before they get a mentor to help them. I
Yeah.
mean, more or less, if you could, like, what stage are they at? Do they have education background? Is it high school? Is it college? Is it university? How are they just starting that mentorship? And then how long is that mentorship program normally? Is it a fixed time? Could be,
Yeah.
1 month or 6 months, or is it more multiple years before they're, you would say, ready to apply for positions in the corporate world?
Okay, yes. So what we are doing right now is we encourage everyone to apply. So we have very diverse group of people applying to our programs. We have people with just high school, but we have people with PhDs. So we have, that wide range of people that are trying to get into that tech career and they have faced challenges. And what we are doing is initially, and it's so important to also bring these type of timelines to a lot of community members, is the training is full-time training for 12 weeks. So that full time 12 weeks training provides you the landscape and just the initial state of the art. And in order for us also to evaluate who are who of all of them are ready to actually start applying. We, of course, at the same time that this is happening, we already have partnerships in place with several companies for entry level positions, with, for example, Interact, with Accenture, with Deloitte, where they are gonna start in an interim position. That is a placement of 8 to 12 weeks, and during those 8 to 12 weeks that are following the 12 weeks of training, they continue developing the soft skills. What we have seen, because of course this is a paid internship, this provides a little bit of a very integral way of assessment of the mentee. After, let's say, those 24 weeks of training and internship, we have partnered with several companies in order for them to assess if they are ready for a permanent position or a more long-term position. And we have seen that it's very successful because a lot of companies are actually ready to hire them for long term. And the ones that require more training, actually, we provide several resources, but now they are ready to take those resources, like more programs or even to go to post-secondary education in order to continue developing those skills.
That's awesome, actually. And to know that they actually get on the job, real world training. Yes,
Yes, that's
that's so key. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're indigenous or not. Everybody wants
yes.
that kind of focus and that kind of ability and that kind of opportunity to be able to see, how does things work in the corporate world. So that I'm really happy to hear that. And then after that, you said if they're assessed correctly, then they should be able to apply for basically any job. And I love the idea of the UX, UI, and the
Yeah.
digital stuff because I've seen, I don't know if it's just, again, anecdotal, but I've seen more digital art, indigenous digital art, more in my day to day life these days. And
Yes.
I'm happy to see it because it's beautiful, it's colorful, it's artistic, I mean, it's different and unique and beautiful. So that's awesome.
And just going even further, and I know that you are a technical person, but
Mhm.
trying to go a little bit deeper, of course, one expression and very visual expression is art and the graphics that we can see on the screen. But now think about the changes that you can make in a database if you have an indigenous point of view. Let me give you an example. From a technical perspective, as your audience may know, commonly in a database, you have roles in the database. You have users, normal users, you have admins, you can have moderators, you can have a super admin. And anyway, you can have different roles and the level of the access to the database. And from an indigenous perspective, when we were talking with the elders and knowledge keepers about, oh, this is how a database works, they were like, no, that doesn't make sense for us. What we have in real life is clans. So the clan system that is very common in a lot of Anishinaabe and Cree communities is a way to everyone to have responsibilities. So instead of having restrictions, what you have is responsibilities towards the data. So it's a completely different way to see the database. So instead of setting restrictions to the roles, is what are actually the capabilities and what are the responsibilities of each type of user. And this creates a little bit of a different approach when you are welcoming the user. So it's not about what you cannot do, but actually what are your responsibilities towards maintaining the system. This is just one small example, but this is a little bit of the challenge on how the two worlds can connect in many different ways.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I could talk tech all day, so let's not
Yeah.
go too deep.
I know, I
Um,
know, I know.
let's shift maybe toward the corporate side. So, how
Yeah.
can a company prepare for hiring? Make sure the interview process, making sure that they get, because it has to be a mutual benefit. I mean,
Yes,
regardless
yes,
of
of
whether
course, of
you're
course, of course.
an employee, employer, you always want to make sure that there's a mutual benefit relationship so that you both gain, right? The employer gets the talent and the knowledge, and they can improve their business, while the employee gets skill sets and networking and a sense of community. So we want to make sure both sides gain something from this kind of relationship. What can corporate world do to help better prepare for indigenous talent?
Oh yes, I think there are 2 points to make here very very clear. One is that of course lately in the corporate world we have been talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And of course, it has been obvious that a lot of companies are committed to diversity, but what we really want is equity. And this is a little bit how we are, framing it with a lot of the HR, staff that are engaged with us. Because when we are talking about this, then we need to review what are the requirements that you are putting in the job description or in the job posting. Because if you are trying to have indigenous talent, but you are asking for a master's degree, well, you are narrowing down a lot of the pool of candidates. And that is not welcoming a lot of indigenous identities because, the reality, because the historical colonial process, there are not many indigenous graduates of master's programs. Of course, the numbers are increasing, but still, there are very few indigenous master graduates. So, how, like, you can start changing a lot of the requirements. And of course, with that is what other mechanisms you can put on place. And of course, is working alongside with us. Like maybe you need to add an extra interview in order to assess the candidates, or maybe you can create an assessment in order to, what do you want to assess with the credential, right? Then another important aspect that we always try to emphasize to the companies is, um, especially in the entry level positions, is so important, and especially if it is going to be an internship of 8 to 12 weeks, that in the interview process, something that we ask is that one of our staff can be present during the interview, not as a way to get involved in the interview. Of course, their process is their process, but how actually we can create a safer space for the members, because when they see the staff that they have been like interacting for a while, that creates a safer environment for them. And finally, another aspect that we mentioned is also to understand that if you are just going to hire the indigenous intern to now, you are going to be part of the diversity, equity, and inclusion committee of the company, or you are going to like do the land acknowledgement in all our board meetings. Of course, that is tokenism, and that is just like to fulfill the work that all people need to do. So it's so important to highlight to the companies, if you're going to hire indigenous talent, is not to replace the work that you need to do among and with indigenous peoples, but rather how actually you are, working towards alongside with the entire company. Because also we have seen sometimes organizations hire an indigenous person, and now the indigenous person is the one that is in charge of everything related to diversity, and is, well, that's not the way to work. So we are trying to navigate this with companies. Of course, it's a very complex conversation because of course it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable. However, I can tell you that now I have seen this shift, especially in the last 2 3 years, especially after the pandemic and post pandemic. I think the DEI departments are more open, and especially this year with all the hype that has been created around AI and everything around the ethical use of AI. Like I think a lot of the companies are more welcoming to these type of perspectives because they are seeing that they require to create more ethical tech.
So this might seem like a bit of a delicate question, but like, and I get the perspective of you don't want as a company to hire an indigenous person to be like a trophy wife, right? Or to
Mm.
say, okay, now we're done. We've accomplished our DEI goals. We've hired a person. We're kosher now, or whatever word you want to use. Obviously, you want to use that talent because there's talent to be used. Like the person has obviously someone coming in has something to offer to the company. So I guess the question is, how do we prevent companies from doing that? Like, how do we? To me, it's an education process, right? To say, look,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's great that you guys are doing now, and people are more aware of DEI. Here's some great talent, with this individual. Let's give him a chance, but more than give him a chance, like let's try to drop all pretenses, all preconceived notions. Let's make sure
Oh,
that we
yeah.
just treat this person as an. Is there anything that we can do to help educate companies to take that kind of perspective? And I imagine it's a longer journey to get there, but and maybe you said I believe you said there's a shift already. But is there any way we can strengthen that shift?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Of course, and I think part of, and this is an ongoing process. It's not that we have a definite answer, and there are many, many, many ways to do it. But what we are discovering while we are placing our mentees in several companies is how it's so important that they are not just placed, in secondary or even tertiary projects about, like, these not important projects for the company or not relevant projects. We always joke that companies sometimes they have these projects about coloring what blank uh, piece of papers that are actually just waste of time, that they are trying to, we just want to hire the talent to have the checkbox mark, but actually they are not going to be doing anything, right? They are just going to be entertained in this uh, blank paper, and they need just to color these things that after they are going to go to waste. So what we are trying to say to the companies is so important that these interns, even if they are going to be placed just for a specific period of time, that they get involved into the projects, in the real life projects. And it's not necessarily that they are going to coordinate or manage the projects, but how they can provide input, how they can be just even part of the meetings, even sometimes just to hear what the other people are saying about this specific project, and to coach them in order to understand these projects and how actually they can provide feedback. Not necessarily that they are gonna provide a tons of feedback. Maybe even they are gonna be very short in feedback. But in order for them to start getting these real life experiences, it's so important that they are getting involved. And I think now that we have the online and the remote access and the remote work, is gonna be way easier because now it's just a matter of adding the people to the meeting, right? And what we are trying to do with this is, of course, besides being part of the meeting, of course, assigning someone in the team that can be the mentor, that offline can explain a little bit about the context of the project, so the person is more like conscious about what is going on during the meeting. I think those small things can start changing a little bit of the culture in the organization. Second, as I think, and I already mentioned that, is avoid the tokenism, right? I know that like in the past, it came from a good willingness to do things, but avoid the route of always picking the indigenous person or picking the person of color to do your like DI work, or doing all this work that is entitled for the entire company. I think what is the best approach is, of course, there is someone in charge already of these type of efforts and how they can actually consult with this new talent. What do you think about our approach to DEI? Do you think we can add anything else? What could be a better approach, an onboarding process to our employees? What could be a better effort to train our talent within the organization? I think making sure that people are providing meaningful feedback is so important. And finally, and I think this is my, of course, the long vision that we have is how even when those internship last, and even that those interns are not going to be part of the company, how all those learnings and how all these changes can continue being part of the company, how those changes can be part of the policies of the company, and how the company is willing to change those policies. We have seen companies that are willing to do the work, that they said, these policies, we paid a consultant 10 years ago to create those policies, but those policies need to change, and they are willing to start like creating amendments to those policies. And of course, it's a lot of growing pains of a lot of companies, but they are willing to do the work. um, and I think the benefits that a lot of companies are seeing is that now the markets, and especially if they are an international company, they see the evident advantages of having this diversity and this equity within the workplace, because then you can see the outcomes and how the assessments of the different resources within the organization are becoming more meaningful and significant.
Love it. Thank you for that. I was going to end the session with a question that I'm starting to grow in popularity is, if you had a superpower that you could change one thing about the landscape that you're in, what would it be?
Oh my God. I think, in the non-for-profit sector, of course, a lot of people would say, oh, we need more funding. We need more funding and funding and funding and funding. But I think I want to change a little bit that phrase. And very recent, I got involved and I watched this movie Uncharitable from Dan Palota about the challenges of the non-for-profit sector nowadays. And there is one thing that really resonated with me that I think a lot of people in the non-for-profit sector are facing as well, is how undervalued is the talent in the non-for-profit sector. When we see, like, for example, when we hear the discourses or the narratives of Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, of course people embrace them, and people are so excited to hear how these multi million dollars people are like growing their profits, right? And no one challenged the wages or how much they are earning. But when we go to the non-for-profit sector and we see a manager or we see a director that starts earning certain amount of money, people start challenging it. Why you are earning that money? You need, in few words, we assume that in the non-for-profit sector, this needs to be under resource, and the talent needs to be underpaid. And that's a little bit of why we are embracing all these people in the private sector to earn these multi-million dollars wages. But in the non-for-profit sector that we are trying to make a change in the world, we need to be underpaid. And with that, I'm not saying that we need to gain millions or earn millions. It's just why we are embracing that narrative, that if we are a for-profit company that is exploiting resources, that is exploiting people, no one is going to challenge my wage. No one is going to challenge how much money I'm earning. But if I'm in the non-for-profit sector creating a change in the world, oh my God, no, you cannot earn this much. You need to do this. And it's the assumption that you need to be underpaid. So I think that is something that I would like to see a change. I don't know how to start a change though, because I think this is happening in the non-for-profit sector around the world. There have been some abuses by certain entities in the past, and that's why maybe this narrative was created. But I think we need to move ahead, and we need to, because no one is challenging the private sector around their wages. And I think I think in order to continue retaining the talent within the sector, I think we need to improve this perspective.
It's almost backwards, right? The people
Yes,
who are making the biggest impact on the world, who are actually helping other humans be better, stronger, are getting paid significant, should be paid, or the perception is that they should be paid significantly less than the people that are abusing other people, that are
yes,
destroying the communities. It's a bit backwards.
yes, 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 and I think we're all part of it. Because when I joined the non-for-profit sector, I was with the same mentality, right? No, 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 no. People in the non-for-profit sector almost need to be volunteers, right? But the problem of that, and just to share with the audience, is yes, we can save a lot of money, but the problem is that is not going to be sustainable in the long term. So even that you can save money now, that will create a lot of cost in the future, because now you cannot retain the talent. Now you need to prepare a new person and to start from scratch again, over and over and over again. So actually, the savings that you are having now are going to be very costly in the future. So I think what you said is real. We are going backwards.
Yeah. Alejandro, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for you do. Can you please share with people how they can get in touch with you, how they can learn more about your organization?
Oh, yes, please go to www.indigenousfriends.org. You can also find us in all the social media channels on Facebook / Indigenous Friends, Instagram, Indige Friends, in TikTok, Indige Friends as well, and on LinkedIn, Indigenous Friends Association. You can reach out to us. If you have any general inquiry, or you want just simply keep in touch with us, you can send an email to info@indigenousfriend.org.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And we'll put those links in the show notes below. Alejandro, thanks again. Thanks again for what you do.
Thank you so much, Alex. Thank you for the invitation.
All right, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again in the next Agents of Nonprofit.